Next up, we would now like to invite our next presenter, Dr. Bayanagari Malavika, to present her research on alternative strategies for students who are unresponsive to phonics instruction. Trained primarily as a psychiatric social work counselor and later as a special educator, Dr. Malavika has previously worked as a consultant counselor with various organizations in India and with Aware and Sinda in Singapore. Currently an educational therapist, she fiercely believes in the value of human life and potential, body-mind connection, and uses this to continue to customize and create solutions to suit the varying needs of individuals. Dr. Malavika.
My presentation today is primarily based on the work, my experience with the students, teenage students who had most severe learning difficulties in Singapore. But let me start off with a story. A very rich man bought a swank car, but wouldn't run the way he wanted to. Every time he would take it for a drive, they would have some problem with the other. He took it to the best of mechanics, but either they didn't see a problem or they didn't know what to do with it. Someone told him about a old mechanic in the next town. The mechanic, when he met him, he opened the bonnet, spent a few seconds, and then gave it a gentle knock. To the man's surprise, when he took it for a test drive, it worked perfectly. But surprise turned to shock when he saw the bill, of course. "What?" he screamed. "So much for just a gentle knock? Even I could have done that." The old mechanic very calmly told him it was only $1 for the knock. The rest of it was knowing what to do and how to do it. My topic for today is alternate strategies for students who are unresponsive to phonics. We are here to look for solutions for our students who don't respond to conventional methods of instructions. So like the old wise mechanic, we are here to learn to explore what to do and how else to do it. Academic learning is mostly attained through reading, which is made up of words, which are in turn made up of sounds, known as phonemes. Not being able to suitably process these sounds are reasons for phonological processing disorders. Is there anyone in this room who hasn't heard of phonics? You haven't? Okay. So why do you think it is so important? Why do you think it has become so popular? Any thoughts? I'm sorry? It helps with, how does it help with reading?
You know the sounds of the various tones which will help you to read the word.
Okay. How many of us learned to read with phonics when we were youngsters? And we're doing fine, aren't we? Yeah? But phonics, even when I worked with my students, I found that those who could process phonics were faster than the ones who couldn't. But so even studies over decades supported decoding as it not only produced better word recognition and spelling, but comprehension. Unfortunately or fortunately, research has also shown that up to 30% of learners cannot use phonics or learn phonics due to various reasons. And research has shown, on the other hand, that whole word reading or sight reading can help even students with mild to moderate intellectual disabilities because it is related to repetitive learning. And phonics, on the other hand, it's all about rules, right? 26 letters, about 44 sounds, and about 166 different rules. How many of our students can do this, can process this? Some of the indicators of that the student has problems with phonemes are given here. But when do you press a red flag? There are some students who haven't been exposed to phonics. In Singapore schools, only recently, last few years, we have introduced phonics. Earlier, it wasn't there. And I could see the difference as I saw more cohorts coming in. So some students, though they didn't know phonics, could pick up after a few sessions of coaching. But there are those who cannot, in spite of best of your intentions and their efforts. Phonological processing disorders can also be associated with all this, like we have been speaking of comorbidity. So when a student is not able to learn through phonics, is there any harm teaching them alternate methods? Let me share with you the experience of one 14-year-old that I assessed. Tim read laboriously by decoding most words. During assessment, he read the word house correctly, but realizing that he forgot to decode it, went back and read it as Hughes. Similarly, he read table correctly and then went back to break it up and then read stable. For whatever reason, his previous 3 years was only phonetically, his remedial instructions only in phonics. Would he have benefited if it suited his ability instead? So if the shoe doesn't fit, then the child risks going backwards. We are talking about lives here. I would like to reiterate here that it is not an either or option. Both are important, but depending on what the student's ability is, you just have to change the proportion of it. Have both the whole word method and the phonics. So even if a student is not able to process phonics, don't ignore it totally or don't avoid it. It is important. Am I going backwards? Okay. Alligator and crocodile seem similar, but they aren't, right? Similarly, there are a lot of disorders which are overlap and very close by. And for planning intervention, knowing these differences helped me. For example, most of us, if a student is not able to use sounds, we tend to say he has APD, auditory processing disorder, which isn't true. While we are able to provide assessment and intervention, only an audiologist can give the diagnosis of an auditory processing disorder. Similarly, since though both of them they come together, some students show both of them, a student with auditory processing disorder will have problem understanding information given verbally. While students with dyslexia, students with dyslexia might have problems processing information, understanding information written in printed form or written form. It is also extremely important to know whether your student has dyslexia or intellectual disabilities. If you remember the definition of dyslexia, it says that the student has at least an average intelligence. So intelligence helps the student use metacognition and the skills to process information and learn better. So the whole intervention will differ. Knowledge and processing. Sometimes if a student is able to give you information or answers, but takes a little longer, he still has a knowledge, then the problem is with his processing. So your intervention will change accordingly. Lastly, reading doesn't mean comprehending. We've seen students who can read very fast, not know where to put the full stop, but they don't understand. So listening comprehension would be an excellent indicator to know how much of language does a student learn. And then at that level, you plan your intervention. These are some of the strategies to teach whole word vocabulary. Some of them might be familiar to you. More information is being given in the handouts. I won't spend too much time, but a little on the use of technology though. We believe that more complicated the method, more effective it is, but need not be necessary. One of my students showed excellent improvement in just learning to read text messages from friends, and emails also helped. Okay, one more thing to note. When you're using online material, please review ready-made material or any ready-made online packages to make sure that in terms of language, content, and accent and speed of narration, most of what I found online wasn't suitable for my students, so I had to create intervention material. So sometimes I use the hand phone to read, to tape simple messages created by the student or by me and give it along with the printed text. So that's when, because they are reading it, they have brought out the information, they at least recognize the words, and it's easier to use. There are some common features for all the whole word strategies that I've given below. The first one is graded. The first sentence I remember learning as a child was, "A cat sat on the mat." Any of you all remember your first sentences that you learned to read? Reading aloud is very important. It can be individual, paired, or choral. The brain is forced to listen and learning happens. Repetitive learning confirms and reinforces learning. If you want it in scientific language, neural connections are made. For example, if you want to teach the word lunch, use the word lunch in different kinds of sentences. And the other words should be already familiar for the student. Because my students were very basic in their reading, I used the sentences examples I might give might be very basic, but you have to customize it according to your students. For example, if it's lunch, it could be, "I want my lunch." And the second sentence could be, "I had my lunch," or "My lunch is hot." So lunch is a new word. All the other words are familiar for him. Oral language is extremely important because that is the key skill for comprehension, but more on that a little later. Structural analysis and root words affixes help transfer learning. For example, if the student knows that "re" means again, return, renew will be easy for him to understand. The cat sat on the mat. Coming back to the first sentence that I learned as a child, most students today would not understand that because they wouldn't know what the word mat is. So it is important to it's very important to use a language that is relevant to the student. Because no additional challenges, it's not worth giving them that. The language of American, European, or Australian material might not be suitable for our students because of socio-cultural contexts are very different and they add to the challenge. And we know if it's too challenging, it disengages the interest. Also, the ESL learners that from these countries might be very different from our ESL learners, because for these countries, English is the basic primary language and the student is surrounded by them and at least pick up the listening language. But for our students, they still the local languages are primary. Picture books, something as simple as 1,000 first words are, if it works, why not? And just like Tuti gave the example of lake, even one of my students, when I said lake, he thought I meant leg. And then, because he didn't know what it meant, I had to use Google Images. And one strategy for created passages, like I said earlier, was to give the student the job to say something about a familiar topic or topic of his interest, and then type it out, and that's how it works. So you keep giving them new topics, simple ones, few lines, familiar words to them, and then that's how learning to read happens. Reading would be select passages to the learner's ability or below to start off with. Don't start something above, because you shouldn't challenge them from the beginning. Challenge can come later on. And again, all of us know not more than 5 unfamiliar words in any point of time. Teach the learner how to use context cues while reading. And conversation is one of the best ways to create a vocabulary, to develop understanding of spoken language, and it continues from there. So conversation again can be taped on the phone and given a printed script and given to the student and to be read again to help him to do it. Does this work? Let me give you the example of Ed, who was referred to me mid-term. At the end of assessment, I wrote in my notes, Ed is a very slow reader, but reads with intonation and understanding, more inclined to whole word, sight word reading. At the end of term 3, in just 7 hours, he moved up 3 levels of reading, and my notes said, Ed has shown a tremendous increase in confidence in himself and reading. There is no more shuffling gait and whispered reading. He is always smiling and laughs when he makes mistakes. He tries to decode and adapt to learning, sounds better, but is more inclined to the whole word way of learning. Unfortunately, for the last 8 weeks of the of the 4th semester, I couldn't, any intervention couldn't take place. And when I did the year-end assessment, my heart broke. And my notes said there was severe regression due to gap in remedial support. Ed's progress in reading stopped, and they seemed almost his old self with slurred speech, unclear, slouching, and other body language indicators showing loss of confidence. Even now, how many other times I read this, I feel pain in the heart. So does it work? It does, but it needs the investment of time and energy. In one study, intervention was given 2 hours a day just for 8 to 16 weeks for students with severe learning difficulties, and they showed improvement. But most of us, either in schools or our intervention centers, don't have that kind of time to give. So I feel I would strongly suggest bringing in the caregivers and getting them to reinforce the learning. And intervention is based on also the styles, the strengths of the student, and the challenges. So respect the learner. What I've seen is if a student can do it, he normally will. So if he doesn't do it, there must be a reason, and it's our role as either caregivers or therapists to find out what it is and then make the changes accordingly. I strongly feel you should explain the difficulty, because they always have very slow self-esteem, feeling something is wrong with them. We need to tell them that it's not their fault that they're having problems like this, but don't let them use it as an excuse. So we need to continue to reward their efforts. Help them, ask them, they will know what strategies work when they've learned something. How did you do it? And then help them to use the same strategies for the next time. And always see that they have some kind of success in every session. And if something doesn't work, go back, step back, and then see what could be changed. I have done research, so I know how important research is. But I also know that it takes too much of time, effort, and energy, which is short supply and very costly. So let us who are here because of our interests use our working experience and the findings that we have found, which are different from what is available in books, and share it with the others. When we know that many people are having similar experiences, that is what encourages it to become a part of formal research and formal knowledge, which is useful to the larger good. Advocate for the learner. We need to tell the caregivers that it's not regular mainstream schools which are only good. We have excellent secondary, vocational and ITs in Singapore, which might take a little longer for them to reach their goals, but the success is much surer with less behavioral problems. And as caregivers or therapists, we need to take care of ourselves. So eat well, sleep well, be healthy, and have fun. Learner is king. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Ms. Malavika. Very passionate presentation as well. Enjoyed that. I'd like to call upon Ms. Dixon to present a token of appreciation for Dr. Malavika.